Rose Hill Revisited. Volume 6, Number 2. Spring 1995. By Kathy Gempeerle and Sandee Remis. Rose Hill Cemetery, on the western outskirts of Edgewater at 5800 North Ravenswood, is one of Chicago's oldest nonsectarian cemeteries. The 330-acre property is bordered by Western, Peterson, Ravenswood and Bryn Mawr, Damon, and Bowmanville avenues. The cemetery will be the starting point for EHS's 7th annual home tour on Sunday, September 17, 1995. By the late 1850s, the death rate of Chicagoans was taxing the capacity of the municipal cemetery located on the lake shore at the south end of what is now Lincoln Park. In the wake of typhoid and cholera epidemics, it was also determined that using the site for burials presented a danger to the growing population of the city. Because of the high water table, diseased bodies buried there were transmitting disease through the city's drinking water, which was taken directly from the lake. A petition by concerned citizens and the testimony of Dr. John Rock led to a decision to relocate the graves outside the city limits, which then ended at Fullerton Avenue. 7 miles north of the city limits lived a stubborn farmer by the name of Hiram Roe. Atop the highest point in the area, his farm was commonly known as Rose Hill. One of the reasons his land thrived was because, when it rained, it was one of the few farms that didn't turn into a swamp. A group of investors led by Chicago's first mayor, William B. Ogden, had already bought up many of the farms and tree nurseries surrounding Rose Hill. But Hiram wasn't about to sell his farm to a bunch of politicians and big shots from the city. It wasn't until Ogden promised the farmer that the cemetery would be named in his honor that Roe finally relinquished and sold his land. The city clerk's office, however, mistakenly spelled the name Rose Hill, at least according to one version of the story. Another version insists that Ogden and Roe finally agreed to drop the apostrophe and flip-flop the E and S, yielding a softer, more appropriate appellation for a cemetery. Rose Hill, dedicated in 1859, is one of the oldest private cemeteries in Chicago. Its site is the highest elevation in the city and the second highest in all of Cook County. It is one of only 3 cemeteries in or near Chicago organized under a perpetual charter, granted by the Illinois legislature, which guarantees its absolute permanency. Per the state constitution, all cemeteries organized since 1870 do not and cannot possess a perpetual charter, and are liable to interference at any time. At the beginning of the 19th century, cemeteries were generally reputed as seedy, dreary places, neglected by caretakers. But Rose Hill's incorporators, which included William Ogden, the city's first mayor, and Major John H. Kinsey, whose father was the first white settler in Chicago, envisioned something quite different. The cemetery was planned as a state-of-the-art, landscaped memorial park. Complete with miles of winding roads and walkways, shimmering lakes, stately oaks, and sprawling lawns, it would be a place where people could escape from the city and picnic in a pastoral, idyllic atmosphere. It was a concept that had come into vogue in Victorian England, when crowded churchyard cemeteries there failed to accommodate ensuing generations. In 1864, the remarkable East Gatehouse was built on Ravenswood to house the Cemetery Administration Building. The architect was William W. Boyington. The style was castellated Gothic. At that time, the cemetery privately owned Rose Hill Drive, which extended from Ashland Avenue to the East Gate. The entrance to the cemetery was marked at Ashland. The cemetery also owned land along Ashland Avenue from Rose Hill Drive to Granville and another strip connecting it to the Chicago and Northwestern tracks. All this land was later sold and subdivided. The East Gatehouse was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1974. The National Register report noted, examples of castellated Gothic are rare in the Midwest, and this stone structure by Boyington, in being an exceedingly well-designed example of the style, ranks among those few that still exist. Castellated Gothic is a style of architecture easily recognized by Chicagoans familiar with another landmark, the old water tower and pumping station at Michigan and Chicago Avenues. Designed by Boyington 5 years after Rose Hill's Gatehouse, the water tower was the only building to survive the Chicago fire in 1871. Castellation refers to the parapet design with alemmating indentations and raised stonework reminiscent of a medieval castle. This Victorian Gothic style was a revival of medieval English architecture and was used for its picturesque effect. The building material chosen for the gatehouse was a buff-colored limestone that came from the Joliet area. This same stone masonry construction can be seen in some early Chicago churches and in the foundations of some of the older homes in Edgewater. Adjacent to the cemetery's east gate, and built of the same stone, once stood Rose Hill Chicago and Northwestern Railway Station. It was very important in the days before autos allowed easy access to outlying cemeteries, when periodic cemetery visits were still part of the social pattern. Bodies of the rich were transported from the city on special funeral trains, bodies of the middle, working and indigent classes rode on the baggage cars of regular trains. The stop was demolished 25 years ago. All that remains is a stairway and the elevator once used to lower coffins from trackside to ground level. According to the custom of the time, visiting Rose Hill in the second half of the 19th century was a day-long social event. Families and friends gathered to perform customary cemetery rituals, but also to visit, picnic and party in the park's beautifully landscaped setting. A trolley car transported people around the grounds. Burial at Rose Hill was considered a status symbol. Interments included industrial giants, mercantile moguls, fiery evangelists, and politicians aplenty, who erected magnificent monuments as testaments to their life achievements. The cemetery boasts numerous Egyptian obelisks, symbolic of rays of light shooting up from the earth. The largest belongs to colorful Long John Wentworth, congressman, Chicago mayor, and flamboyant editor of the Chicago Democrat. At 6 feet 6 and weighing 300 pounds, size alone would have made Wentworth a giant among men. He is usually associated with the city's south side when he owned real estate and had a street named after him. But he left his mark on the north side when his monument was floated by barge down the Chicago River, pulled from the water at Roby Street, now Damon Avenue, and tugged 3 miles north to Rose Hill. Made of solid granite, the obelisk measured 72 feet, weighed 50 tons, and cost $38,000. Wentworth purposely left the stone blank so he would be remembered when future generations asked who was buried beneath the impressive monument. But an inscription was added after his death, despite his wishes. Less pretentious, but a superb example of 19th-century funerary art, is the sculpture of a reclining woman with child which rests under glass, protected from the elements. It stands over the grave of Frances Pierce and her child. Rose Hill's first permanent resident, buried on July 11, 1859, was a Bowmanville neighbor, Dr. Jacob W. Ludlam, Jr., who had sold acreage to William Ogden's Cemetery Company. Rose Hill's ranks swelled a few years later with the outbreak of the Civil War. Cook County carries the distinction of providing more Union soldiers to fight that war than any other county or large urban area in the nation. Rose Hill's Civil War section, just inside the Ravenswood entrance, is one of the most highly touted in Illinois. Several hundred Union veterans, including 16 generals, and at least 3 Confederates, who gave their lives in service, are buried there. Last January, Rose Hill opened Chicago's only museum devoted exclusively to the Civil War, housed in the East Gatehouse Administration.